Hi everyone, this is Callan Rao, and I will be presenting on the article, How Does Ethical Leadership Influence Employees' Whistleblowing Intention? Evidence from China. This will be in relation to Nordhaus Chapter 13, Leadership Ethics. This article investigated the relationship between ethical leadership and employees' whistleblowing intention, along with the mediating role of moral identity and the moderating role of power distance orientation. To start, whistleblowing is defined as disclosure of organization members, former or current, of illegal, immoral, or illegitimate practices under the control of their employers to persons or organizations that may be able to affect action. Although whistleblowing is a controversial topic and is even viewed as taboo in some countries, researchers found in a number of surveys that it is an ethical, positive behavior contributing to organizational long-term development. We'll start by watching a short video explaining why whistleblowing is necessary in organizations today.
Anybody who blows the whistle immediately raises a question. Is it the individual? Is it the organization? In my view, any organization which has a whistleblower ought to start from the supposition that they are right, there is an issue to address, until proved to the contrary. And when I say proved, I do mean proved. If I had to hazard an opinion, in most cases, there is an element of truth about any whistleblowing allegation. It may not be absolutely true, but it may indicate something that is a problem, perhaps not exactly the problem indicated. And that in itself, paradoxically, is valuable to an organization. I mean, what we know from history is that in quite a lot of cases, people blew the whistle, nobody paid any attention. It would have been a lot better if the whistleblower had been listened to. That doesn't mean to say all whistleblowers are right, but this is a serious issue. Actually, scandals coming to the open may be a very healthy sign, because in my experience, 20, 30 years ago, a lot happened that was never reported, never discussed, and it certainly wasn't ethical. These kinds of practices today are much more likely to come out in the open. So in that respect, therefore, I'm rather an optimist in terms of the general trend. Will there always be ethical issues? I think there will. The borderline in terms of what is ethical and not ethical shifts all the time. And we're not all the same as people. We are very different across countries, across cities, across continents. It's unreasonable to believe that everybody will behave in the same way. I believe that actually there are more checks and balances now in terms of ethical behavior than there were before. If you go back 30, 40, 50 years ago, the environment was one in which people kept very quiet about most things. You didn't discuss them. Things were carved up quietly behind the scenes in a way that today would be regarded as completely unacceptable, and quite rightly. So, in that respect, therefore, is there an ultimate answer? Will we all behave ethically? No. The question is, are the mechanisms there to bring them into the open and to cope with them, and not to eliminate them, because we'll never do that, but to minimize their harmful effects?
The four areas explored within this article are ethical leadership and whistleblowing intention, ethical leadership and moral identity, mediating role of moral identity, and the moderating role of power distance orientation. Ethical leadership is explained to be the demonstration of appropriate conduct through personal actions and interpersonal relationships, and promoting that conduct to followers through communication, reinforcement, and decision-making. This leads to the first hypothesis. Ethical leadership will be positively related to employees' whistleblowing intention. Moral identity is a self-conception organized around a set of moral traits. According to the social cognitive perspective, the importance of moral identity can be activated in any given situation. So for this study, the researchers treated ethical leadership as the situation factor or moral identity and argued that there is a positive relationship between ethical leadership and employee moral identity. So this led to the second hypothesis. Ethical leadership will be positively related to employee moral identity. Moral identity has been viewed as a type of self-regulatory mechanism that influences ethical intention and behavior. So, according to the self-regulatory theory, people hold ideas and engage in behavior to remain consistent with their self-concept. So, hypothesis 3, moral identity will mediate the relationship between ethical leadership and whistleblowing intention. They argued that moral identity would mediate the relationship because ethical leaders will be role models for employees to observe and learn from. Power distance orientation refers to the extent to which an individual accepts the unequal distribution of power in institutions and organizations. So, according to the social learning theory, subordinates tend to learn from their supervisors. So, as employees with a high power distance orientation express strong deference to authority figures, they're willing to obey leaders' instructions. So, hypothesis 4 states that power distance orientation will positively moderate the relationship between ethical leadership and moral identity, such that the relationship will be stronger for those with higher rather than lower power distance orientation. Getting into the research procedure, you can see how the breakdown of participants are distributed here. They conducted a 2-wave survey within a 4-month time period. The first survey took 20 minutes to complete. They gave it out to them in person. It involved the ethical leadership of their direct supervisor, power distance orientation, and then email addresses and other demographic information. So 4 months after the first survey, they emailed the participants about moral identity and whistleblowing intention in order for the data to be collected. The second survey was completed on a Likert scale from 1 to 5 based on the hypotheses categories that we just talked about. The article gave examples of questions asked within each category. So, for example, a question within the moral identity category would say, "It would make me feel good to be a person who has these characteristics." And they would respond on a 1 to 5 scale. So, with the results, all 4 hypotheses were supported by the data. Results showed that ethical leadership was positively related to whistleblowing intention, moral identity mediated this relationship, and power distance orientation positively moderated this relationship. So in China, whistleblowing is a sensitive topic because it has the ability to destroy interpersonal relationships, which is something that is emphasized in the country. But they still found that ethical leadership was an important predictor of Chinese employee whistleblowing intention. Looking at the limitations within the study, the researchers used self-reported measures, which may have increased the possibility of common method bias. But in an attempt to reduce this, they used the 2-phase method to collect data. And then measured perceptions are difficult for different response sources to rate. So people such as supervisors may have a hard time distinguishing these perceptions if they were looking into it. And then lastly, on their side, the study was based on whistleblowing intention and not actual behavior. So just because they have high whistleblowing intention does not mean that they will actually act upon those intentions. And then some self-limitations that I was thinking about included the fact that the study was conducted only from a small sample in China, which is a high power distance country. And it would be interesting to see how it varies in countries with other power distance relations. So here is a fun link that I found that compares countries based on some of Hofstede's dimensions, which includes power distance. So here you select your country. So I did China and compared it with the United States, and you can see the power distance right here. This is China, this is the United States. If you scroll down, it gives you some information. So it says that China is a society that believes that inequalities amongst people are acceptable. So just kind of gives you some information, and you can select a bunch of different countries if you're interested in comparing. So the last thing was that research the research only looked into follower ethics, but what about leader whistleblowing ethics? Do they follow the same ethical code of conduct? Do they have the same intentions? So the discussion section touches on the importance of hiring ethical leaders, and the results showed that high power distance orientation employees are more likely to pattern their behavior after a leader than are those with a low power distance orientation. So how leaders act really does matter and affect employees. So relating this back to more of a personal level, especially in the coaching realm, as a coach, you want to see your athletes learn, grow, become ethically sound individuals who do the right thing. And the discussion talks about how leaders need to be ethical in order for employees to have good moral identity. So what about an ethical coaching staff that kids are consistently surrounded by? You constantly hear about coaches who play their own kids over other players who are better, or they play favorites. You hear instances about coaches who have an aggressive and possibly questionable coaching style. But I also believe that it's a different story when your followers, per se, are young adults who may not have the confidence to speak up about situations that may be unethical. The article stated that previous researchers have identified that gender, age, their level of education, their time within an organization were related to the decision to engage in whistleblowing. So it is connected, and it is an important aspect to keep in mind. I found a global code of ethics in the Association for Coaching that provides guidelines for ethical accountability for coaching development and mentoring excellence. It has a number of subcategories such as inappropriate relations, conflict of interest, terminating relationships, inequality and diversity, to name a few. The link is available in the details section if you would like to take a closer look. So although this article discusses the impact of whistleblowing among employees, I believe that morally sound employees come from morally sound leaders. Nordhaus says that to make a change in other people carries with it an enormous ethical burden and responsibility. Because leaders usually have more power and control than followers, they also have more responsibility to be sensitive to how their leadership affects followers' lives. So these leaders have a special responsibility because the nature of their leadership puts them in a position where they have an opportunity to influence others in really significant ways. And in coaching especially, you have a huge influence on your athletes. There will be team or organizational conflicts. So as a leader, how will you enact your followers to deal with these changing circumstances? According to Heifetz, leadership involves the use of authority to help followers deal with the conflicting values that emerge in rapidly changing work environments and social cultures. So they use their authority to get people to pay attention to these issues, make them as a reality test, manage these issues, and kind of give them conflicting perspectives to help them in their decision making. So although all organizational cultures are different, these responsibilities don't come lightly. So if you want to sustain an ethical organization and have followers who feel empowered to do the right thing or engage in whistleblowing, it really does start from the top. Thank you all for listening. And once again, if you're interested in any of the links seen in the presentation, they are available in the details and description section below the video.